Hello, guys. Hello.
Hello, are you
Yeah,
listening?
can you hear me? Good evening.
Good evening.
Can you hear me? Okay, good.
Are you
Test.
listening?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank
So just give me maybe a few minutes to set up something. Give me a minute. So how are you today?
That's good.
I'm
Okay,
fine.
good, good. Please don't chat here. Use our Telegram. Yeah, please use our Telegram to do the chatting so it won't disturb the screen because I'm recording this. Okay, so let me show you my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes, I see.
all right, so just give me a minute. Okay, so everyone ready?
Yes.
Okay. I'm recording this. If you want to record the session, please do. Okay. All right. So I'm still waiting for maybe a few more participants to join. Can you see how many participants are joining us today?
I think uh,
About
We already
31,
have
right?
31 participants.
Yeah. Okay. So okay. So I'll just start with the session. Just to repeat our previous session, let me open up the, yeah, just give me a minute. Just to review the previous session. Okay, so today is about analyzing risk. So this is our today's, what do you call this topic? Yeah, analyzing risk. Yeah. I will also turn on my other tools.
तेरा नंबर जानी जानी ये शनाख्ती कार्ड से सुना हर किसी ने
So please turn off your mic. I can actually turn off, yeah, so mute all, excluding me, yeah. Okay, so if you need to talk to me or saying anything, please do the chatting in on our Telegram. Okay, so before I start, let me just audio video is okay. Okay, again, let me repeat. Can you see my screen, my presentation? Okay, good. So today's lesson, this is our session number 2, or our second session for our CompTIA Security Plus virtual class. So today's topic is our analyzing risk. Yeah. So here we'll be discussing about analyze organizational risk, and then the second topic is analyze the business impact of the risk. Yeah. Let me check again my status. Yeah, I'm still recording. Okay, so let me check again if I'm still recording this. Anyone can anyone also record this? Maybe Krishna or
Yep, I'll do that.
yeah, okay. Can you record on your screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I will.
All right, correct. That's great. Okay, so let's begin with the first topic, which is analyze organizational risk. So now let's talk about risk management. Yeah. So in terms of definition, risk management is the process of identifying risk, analyzing them, developing response strategy for them, and mitigating their future impact. Now, so with the risk management, we can try to prevent or even lessen the effects of security incident.
Excuse me,
I think I'm still hearing someone talking. Let me mute all. Okay. So risk management has 4 phases. The first phase is the assessment. The second one is analysis. The third one is response, and the fourth one is mitigation. Yeah. So assessment is the process of assessing the risk, while analysis is about analyzing the risk. We'll go in depth into every single phase in a while, later on. And then response is about selecting the response based on the assessment and analysis, the result of analysis. And then finally, mitigate the risk if necessary. Okay, then let's move on to components of the risk analysis, components of the risk analysis. First is you need to determine, oh, no audio. Can you hear me? Okay, good, good. I thought you can't hear mine. Yeah. Anyway, so let me repeat. Components of risk analysis. First is to determine vulnerabilities that a threat can exploit. And then second is to determine the possibility of a damage occurring. And the third one is to determine the extent of potential damage, or also known as the impact. Okay, so please try to make sure that you understand the components of the risk analysis, where you have to determine vulnerabilities, possibility of damage occurring, then the extent of potential damage. We'll go into details later on. Let's move on to phases of risk analysis. Okay, now risk analysis is the process used for assessing risk damages that can affect the organization. And the phases starts with identifying your asset, and identifying vulnerability based on the asset you have registered, and then move on to threat assessment, assessing the threats related to the asset being evaluated or being assessed, followed by probability quantification, which is the process of quantifying the probability of the threat and vulnerability. And then this process, number 4, will be followed by analyzing analyzing the impact or impact analysis. Then the next step or phase is determination of your countermeasure. What should be placed to countermeasure the impact or the possible exploit. Okay, so that's about phases of risk analysis. Next is we'll review several categories of threats. The first one is known as natural threat. So this is the category. So natural threat, meaning that any activities of a nature that is uncontrollable or that are uncontrollable by a person or a human. So like catastrophic disaster, natural disaster is this one. The second one, the second category of the threat is man-made, which is normally related to residual occurrences of individual or collective human activity. This man-made can be intentional or unintentional. And then the last one is the system, which is relates to any weaknesses or vulnerabilities found in our network, services, application, or even devices. Okay, so those are the threat types based on their categories. Okay, now, how do we analyze the risk? There are several methods. Very common methods are the first one, known as qualitative risk analysis method, which is normally by using scenario based. Now, the problem with this is that this is very subjective and very hard to test. You can actually describe the measure based on, let's say, the impact of the risk, like high, medium, and low. The second method commonly used is quantitative risk analysis. Based on numeric value, risk data will be compared with historical records, experiences, industry best practices, statistical theories, and some tests. Yeah. So in terms of this method, you will need to also determine several things. We'll go into details later on. Yeah, like for example, you will need to determine the value of the asset. Yeah, that's part of the quantitative risk analysis. The third method, which is very commonly used, because sometimes, you know, organization would like to use a mix method. They mix like qualitative with quantitative to get more what do you call this, balance. Yeah. So uses description and numeric values. This one is semi-quantitative. Attempts to find middle ground between qualitative and quantitative risk analysis. Yep. Now I have a question, or maybe you have a question like, why do we need to use this semi-quantitative while we can actually use qualitative and quantitative? Now the problem with the qualitative and quantitative is that we can't be sure about the result, or I mean the result of the risk assessment itself. So sometimes we need to combine different methods to find the best out of them. Yeah. Okay. So depending on the organization, they can choose whether to use the first one, qualitative, the second one, quantitative, or even mix one, which is the semi-quantitative. Yep. So let's look at the risk calculation. There are several ways of calculating the risk, but I'm showing you the most commonly used. Yeah. For example, we use the term SLE, which is known as the single loss expectancy, the financial loss expected from a single adverse event. The second one is the ALE, which is the annualized loss of expectation, or expectation. The total annual cost of the risk to the organization. Yeah. And we also have the ARO, which is the annualized rate of occurrence, the number of times per year that a particular loss is expected to occur. So if an organization wants to calculate what is the single single financial loss expected from a particular event, they should use SLE. But when they want to calculate the total annual cost of risk based on several events, several adverse events, then they have to use the ALE. So let's look at the formula. The formula of ALE equals to SLE times ARO. That's how you find the total annual loss of a risk to the organization. Yeah. Risk calculation depends on both cost of losses and cost of mitigation. And also vulnerability table can also can help you to document risk calculation factor. Now, let's have a look at some examples here. Like we have a very simple table that comes with vulnerability, identification source, risks of occurrence, starting from low, which is 1, and high, which is 5. Impact estimated in US dollar, and finally the mitigation. First example, flood damage. Identification source would be physical plant, risk of occurrence is 5, which is high, and estimated impact in US dollar is 950,000 US dollar. What about the mitigation? Mitigation is applying or adjusting physical for flood insurance. Yeah. So physical adjustment and flood insurance would be one of the proposed mitigations method. The second one is electrical value. Identification source is physical plant. Risk of occurrence is about 2. Now, by the way, when you provide the value, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, it depends on your judgment or maybe your team's judgment. Okay, so 2 is based on our team's judgment. If someone asks you, why did you give 2 for this particular vulnerability? Yeah, you can tell them it was actually calculated based on, or maybe based on our discussion. Yeah, so 2 is an example of a risk of occurrence given by your team. Yeah, impact estimate in US dollar is $100, and mitigation would be having generator or uninterruptible power supply, or known as the UPS. Okay, now how about the flu epidemic, just like this corona? Yeah. Identification source would be related to personal and risk of occurrence, like maybe 4, yeah, depending on your judgment or your team's judgment. Impact estimate in US dollar is about $200,000, and mitigation would be flu shots, yeah, or injections. So these are some of the vulnerabilities presented to help you to calculate the risk. Next, risk response techniques. So once you have assessed your risk, calculate the risk, and of course, analyze the risk, the next step would be, how do you respond to the risk? There are several techniques that you can actually use. The first one is accept. You should know this, yeah. So acknowledgement of the risks and consequences that come with it. Acceptance does not mean leaving a system completely vulnerable, yeah. And acceptance here is recognizing that the risk involved is not entirely avoidable, or even you can tell that the cost of mitigation would be prohibited, yeah. You can think about different, we can do some discussion on this, yeah. And then the second one is transfer, when you allocate responsibility of your risk to another agency or to third parties, such as insurance company, or outsourcing your part of your services or part of your infrastructure to the cloud service provider. The third response technique is avoid, which is to eliminate the risk altogether by eliminating the cost, meaning that you don't, your organization would just, you know, avoid the risk by not pursuing a project, perhaps, yeah, just an example. And the last one is mitigate, which is the action to protect against possible attack. And this should be implemented when the impact or potential risk is substantial. Yeah. Examples are like active defenses, and even like having backup, yeah, at-risk data. or maybe having your intrusion prevention system, web application firewall. Those would be the examples of mitigating the risk associated with the threat and vulnerability. Okay, so next is risk mitigation. Several mitigation and control types available. Yeah, like you can apply technical controls, which can be hardware, software, to monitor and prevent attacks and threats. Yeah, like antivirus, firewall, intrusion prevention system. The second one is management control, procedures that are implemented to monitor and adherence to the adherence of the organizational security policies. Examples would be, you know, security policy awareness training, yeah, or general information security training, awareness training. Then followed by operational controls, which is normally which are normally related to safeguarding the aspects of day-to-day operations, functions, and activities, such as separation of duties, or maybe like mandatorification, or maybe something like least privilege. Yeah, remember yesterday we discussed about risk privilege. Sorry, the previous session we discussed about that. And then the last one is loss or damage control, which are security measures that are implemented to prevent key assets from being damaged. So those are the risk mitigation and control types. Next, what about change management? Now, change management is a process of approving and executing change to assure maximum security, stability, and availability of your information technology services. Now, the main objective of the change management is actually not to introduce risk. Yeah, so that's actually the objective. How do we control the risk so that the risk will not be will not be expanded, or maybe when you do some changes in your application, it might also create some other risk which are not, you know, identified earlier. Yeah, so changes in hardware, software, infrastructure, documentation can have bad effects in your organization's security, including quantifying cost of training, support, maintenance, and implementation. And of course, you will need to make sure that before you approve the risk, before you approve the change, so you will need to make sure that the change would not actually create risk or even other type of risk. So the process starts by analyzing the risk, yeah, planning the risk, and finally implement the risk. Yeah, you can see the sub, activities below, like analyze. Why do you need to do the changes or change? Type of change, organizational culture, change role, duties, address resistance, manage transition phase, confirm adoption, and conduct. So to make sure that you are doing a good change management practice or practices, you will need to make sure that everything is recorded. Yeah, so from the change request to the analysis, approval, and finally, you know, applying the change or changes in your production system or in your application. Yeah, so this is just a continuation of the change management. Yeah, so for example, new service pack fixes several security vulnerabilities for a production server. This is also an example of a change that should be managed. Server hosts a custom application that must remain available. And remember that change management will need to have the policy. So we always start with having the policy, which is the example of the, let me get back. Yeah, management related control. So before even you implement the change management, you'll need to have a policy that actually talks about change management. Yeah, so always start with management related control, then followed by technical related controls to enforce your management controls, as well as operational security controls to enforce the daily or the day-to-day jobs. Yeah. So change management policy requires form approval for all service packs. This is just an example. Like for example, the new service pack must be tested in a lab server prior to deployment. Test result would indicate the service pack crashed the custom application, for example, and the custom application must be revised, retested before service pack is deployed. Yeah. So this is just an example of a change management that requires a form of approval, because the changes might also introduce different type of risk. Yeah. Like for example here, service pack crash. Your server does not perform as usual, and definitely it will ruin your production. Okay, some guidelines for analyzing risk. You can read this one. First, you will need to clearly define organizational expectation for security, identifying assets that requires protection. You need to also determine the values of the asset, find any possible vulnerabilities that could adversely affect the organization's security goals, determine possible threats, the likelihood, the impact, as well as identifying optimal risk analysis method. So you need to choose which one, which particular risk analysis that your organization would like to use, like quantitative, qualitative, or even semi-qualitative. Right? Identify possible countermeasures, as well as clearly document all findings and decision. Okay. So before we continue with the next lesson, let's do the activity, analyzing risk to the organization. With the scenario, developed tech has concern about security of a server room. Server room is on the first floor at main headquarters. Room is next to the main lobby, has no window, and has a numeric keypad for access. Rooms contain employee data server and client data server, and you will need to conduct full analysis of a server room physical security. Okay, so we'll take a break, maybe for about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we will continue with our next topic in this particular chapter or domain. All right. Okay, so just to repeat that we have the BIA, known as the Business Impact Analysis, which is the process of identifying organizational risk and determines their impact of ongoing business critical operations. This is actually related to any critical business functions and operations in the organization that must be prioritized before you even create your business continuity plan. Yeah. So it starts with estimating the tolerable downtime, the effect, analyzing the effect of financial loss, resources needed to restore, probability of reduce efficiency and prioritization of critical processes. Yeah. So we got some examples here. Impact life, property, safety. Yeah. So this is finance. Yeah, like terrorist attack, break-in. While reputation is also part of the impact. So slide 17 is about reputational impact, which could be like, you know, loss of trust by your clients. And it was actually, it might caused by man-made risk and system risk. Okay, then just wait for a while. Yeah, policy assessment. Policy assessment is about assessing the privacy. There are several tools that you can actually use. Like, for example, you can use privacy impact assessment, a tool for identifying and analyzing risks to privacy during the life cycle of a program or system. Privacy threshold assessment, PTA, a document used to determine when PIA is required, and the PII, you should know about PII already. Information that the company uses to identify or contact employees and other individuals. Yeah. So anything about PII or even the PHI, yeah. PHI is the personal health information, but we are concerned on the PII, which is actually our information collected by our employees, employer and other individuals. Yeah, so anything related to PII, PHI, PIA, and PTA are related to privacy assessments. Next is the critical system and function. So you have to understand several concepts here, like, for example, the MTD, MTTF, MTTR, MTBF, RTO, RPO, and so on. So let's start with the MTD, maximum tolerable downtime. This is the longest time period that the business outage can occur without causing irrecoverable business failure. And normally MTD should be set for each business process. It ranges from minutes to hours to days and should be verified by the coordinator. And depending on the organization, it might range differently. Yeah. So that's MTD. So for example, the MTD is 8 hours. That would be the longest time period that the business outage can occur without causing a very big damage and irrecoverable business failure. So we set this, for example, 8 hours. RPO, recovery point objective. This is the longest period of time that the organization can tolerate lost data being unrecoverable, and usually expressed in hours. And based on the RPO, you can set up the backup frequency. Yeah, so RPO is on the left. The event, which is the disaster, is in the middle, and we have set the MTD to, let's say, 8 hours. So for example, you can set your RPO to 1 hour, meaning that you'll need to do the backup every 1 hour, because you will not, I would say, you will not get your data after 1 hour. So meaning that when you do the backup, you'll need to look at the impact, whether 1 hour is more than enough to actually capture the recent data. Next is the RTO, which is the length of the time it takes after an event to resume normal business operation and activities. RPO plus time spent preparing to resume processing and should be achieved before the MTD. So you can see that RTO is in between the event and the MTD. So for example, RTO should be lower than 8 hours that we have already defined for the MTD. So for example, RTO should be maybe 3 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, yeah. And remember that in between, we also need to, after the, let me just close this. So after you do the restoration, for example, your RTO is 3 hours, you do restoration, and then after that, you work with your IT staff to verify whether all data has been or have been restored, and then validate those data. Maybe there are some, corrupted data and so on and so forth. Yeah. So RTO must be lower than MTD. And then we have other terminologies like mean time to failure, the average time that the device or component is expected to be in operation. Yeah. It measures of, this is the measure of reliability for non-repaired devices and components, and total hours of operation on numbers of failure. We also have things called mean time to repair, which is the average time it takes for a device or component to recover from failure. It should be less than RPO when the components is relevant to recovery effort, and also referred to as mean time to recover or replace. Then we have mean time between failures, the rating on a device or component that predicts the expected time between failures. Measures of reliability, it can also indicate need for redundancy measures. And there's a formula, MTBF, mean time between failure, is equal to MTTF. What is MTTF? Mean time to failure plus MTTR, which is the mean time to repair. That's the MTBF. And some guidelines for performing a business impact analysis. Number one, you will need to identify mission essential function or critical systems or critical functions. Then identify impact scenarios. You need to also calculate MTD, RPO, RTO, MTTF, MTTR, and MTBF, as well as conducting privacy threshold assessment and privacy impact assessment. Just to make sure that you understand, when you have any data collected by your organization and these data are being used for something, then privacy impact assessment should be done in your organization, just to make sure that the data being collected, being used, being removed, or being restored is according to the compliance and regulation. And finally here, for the guideline for performing a business impact analysis, you will need to identify single point of failure. Yeah, we have another activity. You can do this later on. Performing business impact analysis. I'll take a screenshot and send it to you later. Yeah. And yeah, this one, nothing much. We can skip this. Yeah. So if you want, you can also do this reflective question. What type of risks does your organization face? Remember those risks: financial risks, reputational risks, and so on. And what method would you use to analyze those risks? Remember the quantitative, semi-quantitative, qualitative. And number two, if you were developing a BIA for your organization, what types of systems and function would you deem essential to operations and why? Okay, so let me stop the share. and stop record. So today's lesson is about risk. So I'm hoping that you can actually do the discussion about the topic, this topic, today's topic, and the previous topic. Okay, so let's discuss in our Telegram group. And if you have any question, let me know.